I can still remember playing the shareware version of Quake 1 way back in the day. From the first time that gameplay demo loaded up and showed that cluster of zombies being blown away by the grenade launcher, through to when I finished the first episode after God knows how many hours spent. Years later, Quake 2 came out, and though it wasn't quite the same thing taking place on the planet Strogos, it was still pretty damn good and offered some of the best first-person shooting available at the time. Now fast forward to when Quake III Arena came out, and imagine me as a 13-year-old kid waiting diligently for the game to install. The title should have been the real giveaway, but for some reason I guess I still expected there to be some sort of dedicated single-player campaign that wasn't derivative of the multiplayer mode. Quake III Arena was a strictly multiplayer-focused shooting game, having nothing to do with the previous games aside from featuring certain enemies and protagonists as playable character models. It was the first time I'd ever played a game that I felt had been incorrectly reviewed. I mean, when a game comes along nowadays that is almost strictly multiplayer focused, it often gets torn to pieces. However, with Quake 3, at the time of its release, critics had nothing but glowing things to say about it.
You have taken the lead.
Lots of 9 out of 10s and 90% scores for what was just a multiplayer game with a single player mode tacked on as an afterthought. Strange more so as it was developed by id Software, who literally created and popularised the whole tightly crafted FPS single player experience. I think everyone was too scared to say bad things about it, and everyone else just expected it to be a good game because it was the next Quake game and happened to be developed by id Software. What I would eventually learn is that Quake 3 has a whole lot more to offer, being a game with an incredibly high skill ceiling and addicting gameplay, and I really learnt to love it. But anyway, let's load it up now and talk about it, shall we? So anyone who was into gaming at this period will remember we also got Unreal Tournament around the same time, both games which were heavily multiplayer focused and both games that seemed directly competing with one another. Most people could argue about which is better until they bleed from their assholes, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. They're both great games and it's truly a case of apples and oranges. Quake 3 I think though is the most rudimentary of the two, really focusing more on deathmatch, featuring smaller maps with structural layouts that encourage chokeholds and funneling action towards certain areas. Weapons were mostly copied over from the last couple Quake games, so you had the machine gun, which I guess is a reskinned MG from Quake 2, and the plasma gun, which I also guess replaces the hyper blaster. The shotgun, rocket launcher, railgun, lightning gun and grenade launcher are by and large the same, and lastly the BFG now has an increased firing rate.
Excellent.
And the melee weapon is a gauntlet with a spinning blade. If you've played Quake 2, most of these will be familiar, and in time the way they function in Quake 3 will become second nature.
Excellent.
Moving on, the story is painfully simple. In fact, it's not even really told at all, I think, outside of the game's manual. All you need to know is you've been inducted into some kind of eternal arena where all the greatest warriors from all the galaxies and all the universes are competing, or some shit like that. By default, your character is a badass cigar-chewing sergeant, but that doesn't mean jack shit, and you can change your character model between a couple dozen different options as soon as the game loads. After that, you're thrown right into the game during a training match against a female space marine before you get right into the so-called campaign. This is a series of 7 leagues referred to as tiers, where you play 3 matches against bots before a 4th match against a boss bot of sorts that unlocks the next tier. This is kinda recommended because you'll get familiar with the maps but also the game's mechanics, which will be useful when you finally play online. I guess the concept here is that the bots are supposed to get more aggressive and intelligent the more you play, but I never really found this to be the case. The difficulty is pretty much the same from the get-go. In fact, the earlier tiers I often found were harder than the later ones.
Excellent.
One of the first maps you play is against a bot called Phobos, and this guy will just kick the living crap out of you the first time you play him. When I was younger, I would get bored and set up skirmish matches against all of the bots, usually on the smaller maps to make it more action-packed. And it's genuinely surprising how the lower tier bots will often dominate some of the matches against those from the higher tiers. On that note, I guess the bots are intelligent, well, at least in the sense that they've almost got 100% accuracy with their weapons and can navigate the maps with ease. If they ever get a hold of the power-ups like quad damage or some of the better weapons, you can really be up shit creek. But they've got to run out of ammo eventually, and there are a total of 5 different difficulty modes if things get really out of hand. I gotta say, I really enjoy some of the designs of them as well. You've got the protagonists from Doom, Quake 1 and also Quake 2 as playable character models, as well as a whole host of other crazy assholes that are very unique visually. Like a giant eyeball that runs around on its hands with weapons propped on top of it, or a cyberpunk styled hacker chick that moves around on hoverblades. They've also got their own personalities and preferences for weapons and items, and they all react differently during combat. Some bots might run away and restock on health and ammo if they're not doing so well, whereas others will run around blindly with shotguns or rocket launchers with total disregard. Looking back on it, the Quake III engine was really the Unreal 3 engine of the early 2000s, and all of the big FPS games on the PC pretty much used this engine. Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Star Trek Elite Force, Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, and Soldier of Fortune 2. It wasn't as big of a leap as it was when we went from Doom to Quake for the first time, but when it first came out, Quake 3 was just a fantastic looking game. The engine's big claim to fame was how it could render smooth surfaces, which is something you would commonly see in the architecture of maps. Nowadays it doesn't look all that impressive, but it does still run at a pretty smooth 60 frames per second, and if you screw around with the config files, you can get it working in 1920 by 1080 resolution. The music was composed again by Sonic Mayhem, who worked on Quake 2, and much like Quake 2, I couldn't say a bad thing about this soundtrack if I had a gun to my head. It's just awesome. Now, Quake 3 seems like a simple game on the surface, but the more you play it, the more you pick up on the little nuances. Each of the weapons in the game, as unoriginal as they may be, have specific characteristics and parameters that you'll learn pretty quickly. A weapon like the rocket launcher and plasma gun are powerful, but there's slight delays between when you fire and when the weapon hits its target. Then you've got to take into consideration how your opponent is often moving around and can change his direction on the fly, and you have to anticipate their movements and fire accordingly. I mean, do you aim for direct hits or aim at the ground and deal out splash damage? Take a weapon like the railgun, which can be pretty badass from long range, but if someone closes the gap, it can be difficult to use it effectively, and you might want to switch out to the shotgun or lightning gun. Also keep in mind though, both of these weapons have limited range, so you really need to decide whether or not they'll be any use. But wait, Sonny Jims, there's more. There's often countless other factors in the back of your head. Item respawns like quad damage and invisibility, monitoring your ammo, health and armor, as well as having situational awareness of any potential hazards. There's a neat little system in place to stop people from camping weapon spawns, or at least discourage it. The way that it works is whenever you pick up a weapon for the first time, you get a base amount of ammo for it. However, if you're already maxed out on ammo for the weapon, the max amount of ammo you can get from a spawn point is a single round. And now if you get the same weapon dropped from killing an opponent, it grants you the same amount of ammo you'd get from an actual ammo pickup. It's a simple mechanic that means people won't just sit on the more powerful gun spawn points and be unfairly stocked up. Similarly, when your health and armor goes over 100, it will gradually drop down to 100 again over time, discouraging people from camping, which would nullify the benefit of the increased health and armor. I think it's a real testament to the balancing of the weapons when you consider how just because someone might have a rocket launcher or railgun, it doesn't make them unstoppable. People who played Quake 1 multiplayer will remember how goddamn dominating the rocket launcher was if it was in the right hands, and in Quake 3 it can still ruin someone's day, but so can someone equally as skilled with a shotgun, plasma gun, or even a machine gun. Having said that, even a brain-dead idiot with the BFG can wreak all kinds of havoc. That thing is just crazy overpowered. It doesn't show up all that much though, and it's pretty well hidden when it appears, if that's any consolation. Furthermore, the maps you play on are going to dictate the style of shooting. Now, I'm not going to act like every map is perfect, in fact some of them are pretty sloppy, but most of them show off some really well laid out designs, and you get the sense that a lot of thought went into putting them together. Compare that to nowadays, where it seems maps in multiplayer games are just large empty fields with random buildings thrown in willy-nilly. In 2000, an expansion pack named Quake III Team Arena was released. This takes the game in a bit of a new direction, offering up new game modes, larger maps, different factions to play as, and new weapons. I always saw this as a way of trying to compete with Unreal Tournament and to try to make Quake 3 known for more than its deathmatch mode, though Team Arena does still include deathmatch as well as a few new maps. Aside from Capture the Flag, there's also an Overload and Harvester mode as well, and the new weapons include a nail gun, chain gun, and a proximity mine launcher. The nail gun functions like a shotgun with visible projectiles that move about the same speed as rockets. The chain gun is essentially a fast firing version of the machine gun, and the proximity mine launcher is used more in modes like Capture the Flag, to place above doorways and around corners to trap unsuspecting players. Team Arena is alright, but it was hardly earth-shattering when it came out, and it doesn't really offer up anything worth revisiting in 2016 either. It just feels uninspired, and I don't really see any good reason to recommend it. Now look, let's get real here. I've never really been all that good at either of these games, to be honest. I mean, I'm decent enough, but I wouldn't call myself a professional at any stretch. Around the time Quake 3 came out, we were limited in our household to a horrible 56k internet connection, and despite what reviewers might have claimed, the game was not playable online in that state, not by a long shot. playing it now in 2016 is different though, and there's plenty of ways to get online and play against other people, and yeah, I could spend a whole video talking about the legacy of Quake 3, but I think you guys already know all that stuff. For me, Quake 3 has a different legacy as it reminds me of when I was a lot younger with a lot less responsibilities. I remember when someone installed it on our school computers and everyone would spend their free periods fragging each other in between alt-tabbing whenever a teacher walked by the room. Years later, at one of the first white-collar jobs I ever had, someone had also installed it on my laptop and I spent countless hours playing against the other guys in my department. If we ever got caught, we'd just say it was a bonding experience. I mean, it got me looking forward to being in the same room as a group of people, whereas normally I'd avoid groups of people like the plague. And I think that's a testament to Quake 3 on the whole. It's one of those games that anyone can enjoy once you get the hang of it. It's timeless. I doubt people will be doing the same thing 15 years later with Battlefield 4 or Black Ops 2.
Humiliation.
There's an undeniable simplicity to shooting someone in the face with a rocket launcher and moving around a small map at breakneck speeds. And while Quake 3 might not be a masterpiece in that sense of the word, it is just one of those games that I really think has stood the test of time in terms of the entertainment value it can offer. All the kill streaks and all the perks and every single cookie cutter ranked multiplayer shooter can't hold a candle to Quake 3 in that regard. If I had a fedora, I'd tip it. If I had a glass of scotch, I'd raise it. If I had a daughter, I'd let Quake 3 take her hand in marriage. Okay, look, maybe that's a bit far, but you get the point. Quake 3, we salute you. You glorious, violent son of a bitch.